on a global scale that affect us here, whether we like it or not. But as we get into that, let me remind you that the KCB Foundation Tujiajiri program is making sure that young people who enter into the job market right now, standing at 1 million people every year, have an opportunity to connect where they've not been able to, get the education that they need to work, to be able to do so by joining the program. So what happens? Youth employment continues to be a challenge for the majority of the African continent. The overall unemployment stands at 12.7% in Kenya, and with youth between 15 and 34 years old, who form 35% of the Kenyan population, they have the highest unemployment rate of 67%. Over 1 million people into this job market annually get in without the skills that they need. Some of them are school dropouts. Others have maybe completed schools or have not even enrolled in any college. So the KCB Foundation established the Tujiajiri program in 2016 and was to empower these particular folks and equip the unemployed and out-of-school youth in the informal sector to start and grow micro-enterprises. So they combine vocational skills training, business development training, access to finance, and business mentorship. And it's designed to prepare them for entrepreneurship, thus spurring the growth and development of the micro, small, and micro enterprises across communities. They're trained in key sectors like job creation, potential, construction, manufacturing, beauty and personal care, domestic care, and the list goes on. You can join the Tujiajiri program as well. What you need to do is log on to www.kcbgroup.com/foundation. Many things have been happening over the last couple of days. With the inauguration of Donald Trump, there came very, very quick announcements about what his administration was going to do and how that would affect geopolitics and how that would affect world engagement and activation. Now, it was expected because we saw the readings of such during his last administration, that there had already been planned for the heavy reduction of a lot of the aid that went out to countries. He said it, his administration was clear on it, and very few days after he was inaugurated, I mean, it's the 8th day of his presidency, essentially, today, he then made it clear that the USaid, which is the United States Agency for International Development, was going to reduce significantly its funding. And that is the umbrella body under which a lot of funding then goes to many countries around the world. Kenya is one of those receptors. The USAID with regional offices here, then under which we have agencies like PEPFAR, and a lot of other medical aid essentially have stopped their operations in less than 24 hours. Mm-hmm. What does this mean exactly for a lot of the nations who depend on it? I know that we'll be looking into some of the health implications later on in the week, but today we're looking at now what African nations, and I say African nations specifically because we are the ones who take up the majority of the aid that is given out by, let's just take America, for example. The interdependence that we have on this aid, and that is why everybody and their uncle has their knickers in a twist over this recent announcement that if this aid is cut, then by golly, what are we going to do? And I think that it is a very almost treacherous situation whereby someone's helping hand has been withdrawn and economies are now starting to ask themselves, what are we going to do? And I think it puts us in a very precarious situation. And my cry has been from the very beginning that you must be at a place that you're already standing on your feet, so that in case whatever somebody is doing for you then is removed, you still remain on your feet. And so the argument of the interdependence of developing nations on the developed nations comes into play right here. And I think that this gives an opportunity once again for nations to say, guys, where are we? This is not what we want. That if you have one president who comes in and says, well, we're going to pull it, then what happens to you?
Do you know how much the Kenyan government invests in research?
I know how much they don't.
Well, 0 is a good number to start with. 2, we have active programs that are literally created to avoid the spread of dangerously communicable diseases. Cholera, TB, polio vaccines, name it. We do not have the capacity to do all of those things ourselves. And to make it even more interesting is mosquito nets. 50% of them, thereabout, are donated. Suddenly, Kenyans' ability to access contraceptives, protective ones against venereal disease, are going to be affected. So these are things that affect the common mananchi.
Yeah.
Then let us look at how many people are employed around USaid projects in this country. Let's talk about how many children's homes depend on USaid. Let's talk about how many feeding programs depend on USaid.
Yeah.
The question becomes, can a country like Kenya really survive without USaid?
You know, the health implications are actually, we said we'll discuss this on Friday, but they are not only broad, but they're very far-reaching. Remember that the PEFA, the Presidential Emergency Fund for HIV and AIDS Relief, that treatment covers over 21 million people across 55 countries on the planet. And when you interrupt treatment, what you then do is you create resistance to the drug. And the strain of HIV that is drug resistance is then perpetuated. Now, the eventual outcome of this is that there's a likelihood that millions of people will die. It's not really that complicated. It's very straightforward. Part of the aid that was given had to do with what you call opportunistic diseases that arise from HIV and AIDS. You're talking about TB, you're talking about malaria.
Yeah.
Now, and many others. The direct causal effect will be immense. Okay? But let me pause. Side by side with this, remember, PEPFAR was an emergency fund. 20 years down the line, the question has to be asked, and this is, it sheds a spotlight on our preparedness and on our ability to utilize the assistance we've gotten for the length of time, 20 years, we've gotten it, and what we've done with it. Are we less dependent on this aid, or are we just as dependent as we were? If you then move to the area of international or foreign policy and how it was touched by the pronouncements that President Trump made, whether you're talking about Ukraine, whether you're talking about the Middle East, Israel, and Palestine, what you are saying is that somehow there will be a shift, not in global alliances, but in the globe as we know it.
It is a new world order. It is a new world order.
It will dramatically change. When you look at the pronouncements regarding WHO, okay, again, the WHO fraternity have depended on the assistance that the U.S. provides.
Dependent for $500 million, but yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Now, with that gone, suddenly you will find that, again, there will be no gap because people have, there are countries that have already pronounced themselves on saying, we will fill that gap, there shouldn't be a problem. The shifts that will occur globally will be profound. Now, the question that concerns me is, how will all this affect us?
You know, let's look at trade. And I think when the PS was here, he didn't have time to answer this question. First, directly on Kenyans, much of our EPZ is aimed at the United States.
Yes.
And the United States has created tariffs, right, that were affordable for Kenyan companies. If Trump continues on this track he's on and reintroduces tariffs, Kenyans will be virtually locked out of the American market because they will be outpriced because of, one, VAT. Two, our cost of material is higher because we don't produce materials here. And three, the distance between Kenya and the United States is expensive to cover. Now, what does that mean for Kenyan Mwananchi? The people who work in our EPZs, their jobs are in danger. Let's start there. Two, without the leverage that President Ruto had successfully leveraged with Trump, right, being made a significant NATO ally, we have to ask ourselves whether...
With Biden.
Yes, with Biden.
Yeah, not Trump, yeah.
Yes, with Biden, sorry. With Trump, does he have to continue caring about the Haitians who eat their cats and dogs? And then what becomes the fate of our police officers in Haiti?
And this is the thing for me, that from the very beginning, I think we have a design flaw.
Yeah.
A design flaw in operations. That why do we insist that this dependency syndrome that we clearly are suffering from had to be designed in the manner it was in, without realizing or understanding that just because of the way foreign policy works, international or local foreign policy, that the way it works is that it is not static in nature. It is fluid. And it is fluid based on the fact that you do not have one president for life. That an individual who comes into power is likely to change the way things have been by virtue of the fact that they are a different character. That's number one. Number two, it is not aid. You are not Siamese twins. You are not joined by the hip. They are helping you. And one day they could decide that they're not going to do that anymore. That we do not understand this, or that we do actually, it's even worse. That we do understand this, and that we know that one day it will run out, and we still choose to do nothing about it until the trumpet call, like has happened just 2 days ago, and then now you start to panic. So I ask you, would it have been so terrible? What if? Because it's not just Kenya that's crying. Other countries are crying.
It's almost all of Africa.
The whole of Africa is crying now. And you ask yourself, do we even see now where we should be? Do we understand that the kind of the question that you asked, how about you even start by feeding your own people? Let's just even start there. Feed your people. Educate your children. Set up proper infrastructure. Don't eat the goose that lays the golden egg, as those who are in positions of leadership, or anybody who has an opportunity to turn the wheel in a particular direction. That you can chart your course so that you sit at the table, not the dog under the table who is begging for crumbs to fall, but sit at the table and play like one of the big cats. This is the problem that we are facing today, because if you hadn't, it's a design issue. Look at it. You're talking about export processing zones that have been designed to feed the American market. And why not designed to feed the world?
You know, as a student of history, this has happened before. When the Soviet Union fell, there was a line of funding that stopped coming to African countries. That line of funding was provided by the United States to countries that were against socialism. CT, I'm sure you remember this. Now, what we call the African Renaissance, including here in Kenya, was orchestrated by the fact that the competition to provide aid between the former USSR and the US dropped. And when it dropped, it spelled the doom of people like Mobutu Sese Seko and so many other African dictators that we saw becoming democratized in the 90s. That's why we had a lot of multi-party, single-party states becoming multi-party. Now, this is actually the biggest problem. That aid, as far as governments are concerned, are not entities to be used to help the common mwananchi. It is usually free money. Out of 100% that has been received, 70% goes to administration, and if you are lucky, 30% does exactly what it's supposed to do. So for me, this is a blessing in disguise. Just the same way in 1992, it forced African countries to think seriously about the economies and begin to know that you're not going to get a budget surplus from the United States because they want you to remain their ally. Now, all these ILRIs and other research institutes that we have in this country, which were involved in, for example, in the production of the COVID vaccine, it is time they actually worked. We have a robust pharmaceutical industry. We literally have the capacity to copy what the Indians did. It is not rocket science to be able to produce thin pieces of rubber so that people can use them to control the effect of venereal disease. When COVID 2020 happened, we suddenly discovered
that we can wash our hands
and we can and we can produce PPEs and masks over here. It is time, and this is why City's question was so important.
It is time.
It is time that Kenya and indeed Africa was able to supply these things for themselves, because it's not rocket science.
And we keep giving the example of rocket science, but guess what? Somebody figured it out, right?
Yes.
Even rocket science, somebody figured it out. We gave the example yesterday of South Africa. In the time that South Africa's economy grew to the point that now we can talk about it even in BRICS, for example, was the time where it had been shut out by the rest of the world because of apartheid. It was in that time that South Africa's economy grew. Look at the economy of China. When did that economy grow? When they decided to be insular about every single decision they made, whether it was economic, whether it was government, whether it was leadership, whether it was infrastructural growth, whatever it was, they said, we are going to look inside. Former late President Moy, call him whatever you want to call him, but he said something, and he said, we have to have African solutions for African problems. And there is a great lot of wisdom in what he was saying. That we cannot implement something like that is a whole different story. But what are we looking at when it comes to this thing? And I think it's actually a good thing. Let them shut you out so that you have an opportunity to say, you know what, we either sink or we swim. Here's the opportunity for you to do something about your economies. Here's the opportunity for you to take the bull by the horns and actually grow in the manner in which you should. Start by feeding your people. Start by educating your children. Start by having proper road networks. Start by ridding yourselves of corruption and mismanagement and improper leadership. Start from there. Things that aid would not have fixed anyway.
You know, CT, I don't know whether in your house, when you're budgeting for the month, you budget for aid from DO. Is that part of your budget?
Budget what I have.
Thank you. That's what Giuliani said. Work with what you have. It is amazing, and you mentioned this. Traore has been able to remove his country out of debt in a year. There is something that can be done. And the appeal to our leaders is to stop taking for granted that the United States, as it budgets for itself, is also budgeting for you.
You see, the understanding, and you put it well, of aid in any form in the African context, no, let me be specific, in the Kenyan context, is that is money that must be gobbled up.
Yes.
And damn the developments for which it was intended. 20 years of funding. This year alone, the year 2024 to 2025, PEPFAR had allocated 43 billion shillings for this country. 43. Okay.
That's a whole ministry, by the way.
Okay. Now, and for specifically one particular area, you have to ask the question, the billions that have been spent, there are many lives that have been saved. There are many, many changes that we've seen. But does it represent the totality of the investment? The answer is no.
I have to ask you a question, CT, because this was where I was going. And we started a research question. We're going to go to break in a bit, and we come back and continue with this. You worked in a program that came directly under PEPFAR funding, right? It was funded by that. The majority of the people who worked under that program, right? I'm saying the majority, and the people who were also in the Kemri consultancies who worked across the board, where were they from?
Kenya.
They were Kenyans. They were Kenyans.
We had partners from the US, but they were Kenyans. The vast majority were Kenyans.
So the researchers, the scientists,
the doctors, the care treatment personnel, yes.
The researchers.
And then their families.
Yes.
Did you, at the start of the program, is that when you started going to school?
No.
Or you had come into the program with expertise, with knowledge, with understanding?
Trained, yes.
You were trained?
Yes.
You already had that?
And I acquired more training and more understanding.
Before you knew that such a thing existed, you had that, but on the job, I'm sure you acquired more training as you went along.
HIV was actually a new disease. So a lot of the learning had to take place as you are going about the business.
Thank you.
Prior
but your
to that,
fundamental...
Yes, I had training.
Do you see where I'm going with this?
Yes, I see where you're going with this.
Okay, let's take a break and then we can come back and talk about this a little bit more. And the real need for us to understand what we have and to be able to take that potential and activate it for our growth is what we should be pushing for here. So that, you know what? When the mountain rumbles, then you realize, hold on, it's next to us. We are not beneath it. This conversation continues. It's 28 minutes to 9 o'clock. Continues after this.
Welcome to another episode of Wake Up and Make Up. My name is Christine Korea.
Okay, tangu nijifunze kushona viatu, nimeinspire wengi. Okay, nikiwa online, nikaona hizi advert ya KCB Foundation, governor ali-advertise. Asema, let me go try. Mimi nikapigiwa simu na manager wa Kitani Vocational Training Center. Kaambia, Masi, uli qualify kwa kuwa sponsored by KCB Foundation in partnership with Elgeyo Marakwet County. Mimi tukaambiwa pia ukienda shule, itakuwa free accommodation. Chakula utakuwa unagharamikiwa na shule. Okay, fine. After kupitia program ya tujiajiri, nilikuwa empowered as a youth. So niko sahi prepared, at least nitakuwa na mashini. Itaniproducia large number of shoes. Wengi nataka kuwa na duka kubwa na employment. Nataka kuemploy vijana wengi.
Hello and welcome to Health and Wellness, where we explore new health trends, wellness tips.
In the mental space, we never ask what is wrong. We always ask what happened.
We feel the pain of our patients.
And ways to just embrace a happier and healthier life. Small changes can make a very big difference to your overall health.
For this intervention, we don't use any general anesthesia.
Oh, really?
So the patient is awake with us, talking to us throughout the procedure.
If you start having chest pain and you're sweating a lot and you're not doing any physical activity, that's a very ominous sign that you're actually having a heart attack.
To be honest, we've actually done a CS with
muleka muizi, you're bringing mulekwad for you to remove that baby.
So let's incorporate these tips to our daily routine just to ensure our immune system is healthy and strong. Join me, Zaitun Ali, every Sunday at 6 p.m. on Health and Wellness.
We need to make ourselves important enough that wealthy countries would want to defend us. So they came up with a plan. They sent a couple of engineers to go learn how to make microchips for computers. They specialized in that technology so well that there is no other country in the world that produces higher grades of chips that you use on your phone, your computer, everything. And you have seen whether it is Biden or Trump stand up for Taiwan. They did that 30 years ago on a piece of rock. Let me give you another example. South Korea had a problem with its youth. So they thought perhaps they need to do something about the music industry. So about 30 years ago, they decided that 1%, not 2, 1% will be used on making sure every government department has a small budget to hire a musician. Today, what they call K-pop is the second most popular kind of music in the world, and they don't sing in English. The solutions are easy. The desires.
Totally different question.
Thank you. And this is the problem with Africa. Our desire for good is low. Our desire for food is high. I finished my sermon.
Thanks be to God.
You see, whenever you receive aid, the whole purpose of it is so that you can be self-reliant. Please understand, if I'm to carry on with part 2 of your sermon, after the Second World War, Germany needed to be rebuilt. And Germany was helped. After the Second World War, Japan needed to rebuild. It was helped.
South
Korea, the same. I give those examples and I ask, look at where those countries are today. What did they do with the help that they got?
Israel.
It's not a complicated question.
They did what they were supposed to do with it.
Yes.
Very simply. That they rebuilt.
They not only they rebuilt, they learned to be self-reliant.
On it.
And the countries that we speak of are now world leaders. World leaders. You're talking about, you're talking microchips. You may talk vehicles. Let's talk ships. Okay? Ships. Huge ships. Let's talk planes. I mean, the industrial complex that these countries have is massive. Again, it is a question, it's a testimony of what they did with the help that they got. But it's a testimony of their people, who their people are and how they see themselves and what they're willing to do for themselves, not what they're willing to sit and beg for.
And there's a lot of entitlement in Africa. Africa generally thinks we are owed.
Yes.
2, when you look at Asians and you ask them, what countries are you proud of? They'll start Singapore. They'll say China. They'll say Japan.
Indonesia.
If you are asked which African country are you proud of,
you'll say Germany.
You see,
or America.
The African black identity even considers leaving the country, going to the United States of America land, and flipping burgers a better existence than living in Africa.
Let me ask you a difficult question.
Yes.
Okay? A lot of times we talk about being owed. There's a big debt as a result of colonialism for Africa, and especially for Africa. You may look at the Indian subcontinent and some parts where the plunder really did take place.
Yes.
But let's look at Africa, because it was quite deep.
Yes.
Okay? Beyond colonialism, there was proper assimilation that took place in a lot of countries, and so you took on the persona of other nations.
Yes.
There's still some who are suffering to date.
Yes.
So there is the idea that those who practiced and entrenched colonialism owe African nations, which, popular or unpopular, I actually agree with. That there's an element that they do owe. You do. However, this is the question. Had colonization not taken place, and these nations, however they decided to put themselves together and form their own nations, and if Africa remained one big bloc, if that was going to be the case, because we're talking about different countries that essentially were split in 1884 in the Berlin Conference, right? If that did not happen today, do you think that Africa would be on the development index as we want to compare with the rest of the world?
Me teacher.
It's a yes or no question.
Me teacher.
Huh?
Me teacher.
Is it?
China.
Answer my
No,
question.
hold on.
He's answering your question.
I'm answering your question.
He, instead of beginning with A, he's begun with C.
Okay.
Yes.
China.
Which African country are you proud of?
China.
Thanks.
China and India were one of the, in fact, they were the richest countries and were colonized by the British. I want to tell you two stories so that we get over this idea that Africans are owed because we were colonized.
No, leave the owing alone.
Just hear me out. Just give me a chance. China, the British got nearly half of their population addicted to heroin.
Opium.
They literally had to conquer the Chinese, get their people addicted to opium, die miserable lives. China rose. India, during Churchill, was so starved to death. Tens of millions died. There's a sad picture of a man skinny as a bone and his wife and children literally dying at his feet. But he's standing ready to protect his children and wife from the neighbors who are willing to eat them in India. The British, the Europeans are not guilty just in Africa. But I learned one thing, just one. If the person who offended you, you go to ask, please give me reparations, you've still not gotten your power. The answer is both China and India, in retaliation, equally took from the Americans their technology, their patents, and manipulated their currencies against the dollar.
So
the
problem
yes,
that we're dealing with in Africa is not because people came and took your resources or beat you into any kind of
Yes.
submission. Are we trying to say that the problem that we have in Africa is an inherent African
it is a
issue?
Stockholm syndrome. You cannot be kidnapped, abused by a Briton, then you go back and you tell the same Briton to help you. How?
So I ask again. If colonialism had not taken place, colonization, whatever the case may be, had not taken place in Africa, do you think that at this time we would all be sitting at the global table saying,
Yes.
But you know,
we would have done it on our own?
We
would have done it on our own.
No, we wouldn't have, because we wouldn't
Please.
have.
Okay.
All these nations that we speak of long before even the word colonization was invented, had infusions of invasions from other places. So a lot of what they were learning were a factor of what other people brought with them and married with what they already had. If you're talking about roads, if you're talking about the culture of writing, if you're talking, this world has always been influencing itself by learning from others. What we fail to appreciate is that there are powers, countries that are smart, and I dare say smarter than us in this sense. They created narratives, colonialism was one of them, which we imbibed.
With open arms.
Yes, we did. And we didn't understand that what was actually being held captive was not our body, it was our minds.
Yes.
And they continue to do so because they long understood through practice with their own immediate neighbors. Great Britain, their neighbors are the Welsh. It's a completely different community. They're not English.
Nope.
The Irish, completely different, even
Scottish.
with a different language.
Yeah.
Okay? The English determined they would dominate these people.
Yes.
They had ample practice.
Yes.
Before they came out and went to other places, they had practiced. They had fought with their neighbor France. They had done stuff. The point I'm trying to make is this. When you're dealing with somebody that clever, please pause and learn from them.
True.
You just take stock and ask yourself, how does this person go about this business that they're doing, and they're doing so well? Because they do it very well. Do you think that if you're talking about the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, that when Africans were given scholarships to study in these countries, you think they suddenly developed a love for Africans?
Oh, come on.
No.
No. They had long understood, the British more so than others. The way to do this thing is let their people subjugate them.
Yes.
Let their people rule
Let
over
their own people
do these
do
things.
It. And that's how the slave
Yes.
trade was able to thrive in the manner that it did.
Yes.
They did not just come to Africa and pick up people from their homesteads and take them away. No.
How would they know where to find these people also?
There was somebody that was facilitating them then. And let me tell you, today, there are still people that are facilitating them today.
Now,
yes.
Even in this aid that we are talking about. And that is why I'm telling you guys, it's a thing of the mind. To the point where now people are having press conferences and complaining, oh, what are we going to do? But we've put ourselves in the same situation. We've put ourselves in the situation by ourselves.
Do. You know, before the Black Plague and then the consequent cholera outbreaks in London, the Thames River was full of human waste. Okay? These people used to live with the rats so much, they got the plague. Coming from that, they came to Africa. And there's this great story that comes from central Kenya, where a priest came and he was trying to convert the people of the mountain. And he had a problem. They were not listening to him. So what he did...
What language was he speaking, first of all?
Of course, he was speaking English. Okay. Yeah? So he figured out a good plan. So he came with blankets. And this is the same thing they did in the Americas, by the way. They came with blankets laced with leprosy and such diseases.
This is a story, of course.
Yes.
Are there facts to support it?
Yes, it's historical. In fact, I'll send you the Red Indian version of this. Now, of course, our medicine...
I suspect you mean the Native
Americans.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Carry on.
So, what happened is our medicine men could not treat their people because it was a new disease. Then he had the ointment, the anointing. And he told them, this is the anointing that is going to heal you. Having known what he had given them as a disease, he told them, from now on, your mganga is bad and Jesus is good. There's literally a Kikuyu song that I forget the title that literally sings about that moment. Mm-hmm. Now, why do I say this? I say this because one of the most critical things people miss in mathematics, when it is a law by a white man, it has his name. Newton's law, Archimedes' principle. All of them, you know their stories. But when it came from India or Arabia, it's called a quadratic equation.
Who was quadratic?
Exactly. It was not Abdullah or Isa. Every single mathematical law, physical law that was discovered by a non-European is called by a technical name.
But let me ask you something. The story of our continent and the colonizer, and I agree with you here, is not a story of our continent and the colonizer. It's a story of our continent and the sellouts.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
And our people who have consistently sold us out.
And are still selling us out till today.
Yes, it's the colonizer is just doing his thing.
Yes.
Leave the colonizer out of that story.
In fact, if you ask me, it was serendipitous for the colonizer because they came along to do their thing, and then voila, you find a guy who's helping you in your quest to keep it moving.
Yes.
He was like, this is
but
easy.
for him to help, it means it's something we had been doing ourselves.
Yeah.
Yes. See, we don't talk about it enough, but we did. You see, when you have an entire nation who are captivated with a culture of complaint, there is a certain satisfaction you get from complaining. But does it help alleviate the problem you have? None.
Satisfaction from complaining.
Yes. Haven't you been in a group of people where all they're doing is pitching a fit the whole time and bitching? It's one complaint after another. And when you listen, you'll probably get a headache. Then you ask, okay, this thing that we're complaining about, how do we move the needle?
Exactly.
That question may be asked, but the response never features because our mind isn't tuned to asking, how do you solve this problem?
Yeah, exactly.
So we keep looking at the problem. Look, understand it, and then ask,
and then see how to fix it.
Yes. What do we do with this now? America long understood that.
Yes.
They were a colony like us. Okay? Australia was even worse. It was a
colony of thieves.
Penal colony.
Yes.
All the malcontents, the real hardcore that they didn't want, Australia.
Out.
They figured it out.
Yes, they figured it out.
You know, because you find yourself in a. But look at the great events 1, 2, 3 of history. The plague that you speak of.
Yes.
Is it not from the plague that you have some of the best medicines that we still use till today? Because they realized, wait a minute, this thing has killed so many people. We can figure out how to treat ourselves, or we can die.
The numbers were profound.
Profound people who died. The Great Depression, where they said, everything is falling apart. We cannot. What did they say? You said, you know what? We're going to have to start to build from inside. And if we don't do this, we will die. Look at Ireland. There was a famine. They said, okay, what do we have? They found this round thing in the ground that people can eat. It is a potato. We'll grow it until today. Ireland has reserves for 5 years, any time of food. What am I saying? You see this aid that we're all complaining now that people are doing press conferences that they've said they're going to remove? It is a good thing for us. You know why? It is going to force us to do 2 things. Number 1, get it together and fix your economies. And number 2, stop this over-dependence on people who, the truth of the matter is, they don't care about you.
Yeah.
What they're trying to do is make sure that you are look at the nations that they mess with. Look at the countries that they mess with. You must have something that is going to be of their benefit. And that's why they mess with you in the first place. So be the person on the table as well. And that's what I'm saying. It is a good thing that they pull the aid. They should continue so that it forces you to be in a situation where you do something about the problem.
And you stand up.
The guy who created the light bulb have said, boss, we cannot even see what we are doing. Can we create a situation so that we have something hanging from our house and we switch it on and we can now see?
You know, when I understood what City was saying, where we like complaining and doing nothing about it. One time I was driving. I was headed towards Dagoretti Market. And I saw this beautifully dressed person. And they were comfortably standing right in front of the biggest heap of garbage I've ever seen. The irony was stark. You know, when you dress elegantly, you go to an elegant place. But if you are comfortable being personally elegant, presented in trash, then you understand what the African problem is. There used to be a governor in Kenya, and he went for, what was it called back then? Benchmarking.
A governor as in the current governor as in Kenyan governor of a county, or
Yes,
governor
Kenyan
who was ruling the whole country?
No. Kenyan new constitution governor. I'll not mention his name. He went to a European country, right, to go do benchmarking. And from head to toe, he had worn fake Gucci clothes. There's nothing wrong with wearing fake Gucci clothes. But to understand the mindset that tells you that is an appropriate way of representing Africa, tells you the bench he went to mark was left without any mark.
Since when is benchmarking supposed to bring about change?
The thought is that you're going to come back and do something with that.
It's what it's called, because it's what you can justify. You can justifiably place before any board that's going to look at the expenditure. Okay? So benchmarking, we heard, it's an interesting word. It covers a multitude of all manner of things. But there it is. Whatever it is that Trump is doing, please bear this in mind. He's doing it because he believes that will benefit his people, primarily his co-constituency. And when he says the things he's saying, it is them he's speaking of. Some of these things about deportation and what have you, they'll be enthusiastic now. Give it time, the enthusiasm will die down. If you look at farm work in America and you look at the industrial nature of it, if he did 11 million undocumented individuals, 11 million, you remove all these people and look at how the productivity of America, just wait till stand. Who do you think does all that back-breaking work that they have?
There you go.
Who? So, policy we've heard. There'll be movement. A few people will likely leave. But the large number of undocumented people who are in the States will not go anywhere.
Not go anywhere.
Okay? This is political talk. So, let's not be too harsh on our own president in saying he makes promises. Watch what will happen from the promises that he has made and the policies that he has made.
You know when I knew for a fact what you're saying is true? The number of billionaires there represented a net worth of $1 trillion US. Let me tell you, there is two sides of Trump. There's the one that says cats and dogs are being eaten by Haitians, and there's the one that knows that billionaires need to make more billions. And if you remember the tax cuts he made when he, in his first term, promising that they would affect the average American, it is only Elon Musk, Bezos, who benefited. I honestly think that this is a magic trick. The magic trick is this: for the religious and ultra-American base, he will pander to them. But economically, we are about to see one of the biggest transfer of wealth from the poor to the wealthy.
And let's see how that goes. But we need to be at a place whereby we're actually thinking and operating for ourselves. And these conversations need to continue. Liberation of mind, top of the agenda. Let's continue with these conversations. And we'll be looking at revolution and how it may be eating its children. That happens with Wakili at 9. Good morning, 9 a.m.